Nasty work. Another one bites the dust. Jason Lloyd has been exposed. It is over. You look bad. This is nasty work. G. Bush cooked him so bad. Yo, I don't even know how they still working together. G. Bush cooked him so bad. As he should, because that's what G. Bush do. He cooked clowns like Jason Lloyd who exposed themselves. And he got cooked by a coworker. You got destroyed. I don't even know how you gonna sit next to him on the next panel.
A Cleveland Browns insider was just caught red-handed pushing a wildly misleading narrative about Shedeur Sanders, and the receipts were undeniable. Jason Lloyd went on air and brazenly labeled Shedeur the worst quarterback of the modern era, somehow ranking him below Jamarcus Russell, Johnny Manziel, and every other high-profile NFL bust. The claim wasn't just harsh, it was reckless, detached from facts, and immediately unraveled under even basic scrutiny.
In ruins.
He still doesn't know what he's looking at. He still doesn't flip protections. He doesn't know when he's hot. This isn't me saying this. I'm not an NFL. I've never claimed to be an NFL coach. This is people in that building will tell me.
If you're enjoying, please subscribe Shedeur Sanders to the channel. It helps more than you think. He leaned heavily on unnamed sources inside the building and tossed around EPA metrics as if they were unquestionable truths. But once real context entered the conversation, the entire argument began to unravel. Garrett Bush stepped in with actual data, clean comparisons, clear benchmarks, and basic football logic, and the narrative collapsed in real time. This wasn't a competitive debate or a clash of opinions. It was a one-sided exposure. Jason Lloyd was caught stretching numbers, shifting evaluation standards mid-argument, and forcing a conclusion that felt less analytical and more personal, especially when Shedeur Sanders and the lingering shadow of Deion Sanders entered the discussion. The statistics simply did not support the claims being made, and once that became obvious, the excuses started piling up quickly. What began as an attempt to sound authoritative turned into a visible scramble to defend a position that had no factual foundation. This wasn't just a rough television segment, it was a full-blown credibility crash, unfolding live, with viewers watching the confidence drain from the argument in real time. Across the football world, people noticed. To understand why this moment mattered, you have to consider who Jason Lloyd is supposed to be. He's a longtime Cleveland Browns insider with The Athletic, someone who walked into that studio clearly believing he was about to shut down the conversation with insider analysis. Instead, the segment flipped entirely. The effort to frame Shedeur Sanders as a lost cause backfired in spectacular fashion. By the end, the focus wasn't on Sanders at all. It was on how such a flawed, agenda-driven analysis ever made it to air.
He still doesn't know how to flip protections. He doesn't know when he's hot. He doesn't know what he's looking at. He can only throw to wide open receivers. He doesn't make tight window throws. He doesn't throw guys open. This is not the answer. These last 2 weeks were the opportunity coming off the Titans game to show that he can be the guy against playoff contenders, and he has not lived up to it.
This wasn't standard criticism or fair evaluation. It was an attempt at character damage. Jason Lloyd didn't just question Shedeur Sanders' performance. He tried to dismantle his football intelligence entirely. He framed Shedeur as a quarterback who doesn't understand the field, can't recognize pressure, fails to adjust protections, and only completes passes when receivers are wide open. He pushed the narrative that Shedeur can't throw into tight windows or throw receivers open, presenting it as a total skill breakdown rather than an honest assessment. That's where the story started to wobble. When the pushback came, Lloyd tried to create distance by claiming those weren't even his own words, insisting they came from people inside the building. That move is as old as sports media itself. Anonymous sourcing without names or accountability is a shield, not evidence. It allows sweeping claims to be made with zero responsibility if they collapse under scrutiny. And when the accusations are this serious, aimed at a rookie quarterback's competence and football IQ, whispers behind closed doors simply aren't enough. Instead of slowing down, Lloyd doubled down. He leaned on EPA, expected points added, and presented it as a definitive verdict rather than one metric among many. He claimed the numbers proved Shedeur Sanders was the worst quarterback of the modern era. That's not analysis. That's cherry-picking data to force a conclusion. Once again, context was ignored, nuance was erased, and a complex evaluation was reduced to a headline-ready takedown that didn't match reality.
Came out and has said, let it be known that Shedeur Sanders is the worst quarterback in the modern era in a century. Worse than Jamarcus Russell. Worse than Johnny Manziel. Worse than Deshaun Kaiser and Charlie Fry. No, no, no.
Not struggling, not developing. Jason Lloyd went even further and labeled Shedeur Sanders the worst quarterback on record. To drive the point home, he stacked the comparison list purely for shock value, placing Shedeur below Jamarcus Russell, Johnny Manziel, Brandon Weeden, and every failed quarterback Cleveland has cycled through for years. That's an outrageous claim when you consider the reality. Shedeur is a fifth-round rookie who has already posted high-yardage performances and has been starting for multiple weeks. The most alarming part wasn't just the take, it was the certainty. Lloyd delivered it as if the data was airtight, as if the analysis was finished and the conclusion unavoidable. There was no hesitation, no nuance, just a bold declaration meant to shut the conversation down. That confidence lasted only until Garrett Bush leaned forward and started asking the questions Lloyd clearly wasn't prepared to answer. That's when the tone shifted, the pressure mounted, and the storyline began to crack in real time.
You come up with this literal EPA stat. What is the stat? Oh, it's a new one. It's a very new stat that it's a stat that's just come around that dictates and lets everybody know that that this is encompassing of everything. And the names at the top are the names that you would notice at the top that should be there, and the names at the bottom are the ones at the bottom that you don't. Listen, first and foremost, rule number one is if you want to come to the battle if you want to come to the battle, please have your facts straight. If you're gonna have EPA, don't come in there off the phone. What I need you to do is have it written down so that we can explain to the audience, because you said something that was very, very, very over the top.
Garrett Bush had been sitting back, letting Jason Lloyd run through his claims about Shedeur Sanders without interruption. And when Lloyd finally wrapped up, Bush asked one simple question that cut straight through the noise. What exactly is this stat? That single question began dismantling the entire argument in real time. Lloyd tried to explain EPA, calling it a newer metric that supposedly captures everything a quarterback does on the field. He claimed the top of the list looked exactly how you'd expect, and that the bottom told the real story, with Shedeur Sanders sitting there as definitive proof. But Bush wasn't buying it, and neither should anyone watching. Bush laid out the standard clearly. If you're going to walk into a debate like this, your facts have to be airtight. If EPA is the backbone of your argument, it can't be something you vaguely reference from memory. Write it down, define it, explain who created EPA and what it actually measures, show who sits at the top of the list and why some of those names might be statistical outliers. Most importantly, connect the numbers to what actually shows up on game tape. That's where Lloyd came up empty. He had a stat, but no context, no explanation of the methodology, no framework for how EPA should be applied, especially to a rookie quarterback, no meaningful comparisons, just a single number, stripped of nuance, conveniently supporting the narrative he wanted to push. And once that was exposed, the foundation of his argument completely collapsed.
See, the funny thing about statistics is we can make these statistics say whatever we want to.
Exactly. That's my exact point. You can find a statistic to try to prove your point about anything. I don't care if the EPA says that Shedeur Sanders has been worse than Dylan Gabriel, go to hell with the EPA. That's how I feel.
Bush kept pressing and finally steered the conversation where it should have been from the start. He asked Jason Lloyd to compare Shedeur Sanders to quarterbacks from the same draft class. Jackson Dart, Tyler Show, Cam Ward, real peers, players dealing with the same learning curve, the same jump in speed, and the same early career growing pains. Lloyd's response said everything. We're not talking about those guys. That answer exposed the entire setup. You can't claim someone is the worst quarterback in modern NFL history while refusing to compare him to quarterbacks drafted in the same class, playing in the same season, under the same conditions. Instead, Lloyd chose to stack Shedeur against veteran players and all-time draft busts, completely skipping fair comparisons. That isn't analysis. It's textbook cherry-picking designed to force a conclusion.
I bring up those quarterbacks and they're like, we're not talking about those guys. Why are you bringing them up? In what world can you just simply, it's called a data set. So when you're comparing something to something else, you have to have some data and other pieces of information to compare it to.
That was a clear case of shifting the standard the moment the argument became uncomfortable, and Garrett Bush called it out in real time. He broke it down plainly. You can't rely on one set of information when it supports your point, then ignore or dismiss everything else once the picture gets more complicated. That's moving the goalposts, and the audience could see it happening live. Lloyd wanted EPA front and center when it made Shedeur Sanders look bad, but he had no interest in discussing context. There was no mention of the offensive line struggles, no discussion of receiver separation issues, no acknowledgement that Shedeur is a fifth-round rookie who wasn't even expected to be starting this early in his career. That missing context told its own story. And this is where the numbers Lloyd tried to avoid started stacking up. Shedeur Sanders threw for 360 yards and 3 touchdowns in a single game. He also led the Cleveland Browns in rushing for 3 straight weeks. With him on the field, the offense produced more points than it did with Joe Flacco. Those aren't opinions or interpretations. They're measurable outcomes that actually happened on the field. That's when Garrett Bush leaned into the core issue. He explained a basic rule of data analysis that anyone working with numbers should understand. Statistics don't exist in a vacuum. If you strip away context, you're not analyzing the game. You're manufacturing a narrative.
And my question is, and all of the time and all of you tell me you're much more impressed with Dante Moore's tape in his 1 year or what Shedeur Sanders has done in 5 games in the NFL.
Statistics can be bent to say almost anything if you cherry-pick them hard enough, and Garrett Bush made that point unmistakably clear. He noted that when Shedeur Sanders threw for over 350 yards, he accomplished something no Browns quarterback had done all season outside of Joe Flacco. That was a stat too, but suddenly, it didn't matter to Jason Lloyd. Bush explained exactly why, because it shattered the narrative. It showed that Shedeur Sanders is capable of high-level performances when given real opportunities. It proved he can move the ball, push it downfield, and operate an offense at a level critics insisted he could never reach. You can't play both sides. You can't lean on EPA to brand someone as terrible while dismissing real on-field production when it contradicts that label. That isn't analysis. That's bias dressed up as expertise, and Bush refused to let it slide. Bush then grounded the discussion in a principle borrowed straight from the scientific method. If you're going to make claims using data, you have to show your work. You have to explain how you reached your conclusions. And most importantly, you have to compare similar situations. Apples to apples. That means measuring Shedeur Sanders against other rookie quarterbacks from the same draft class. When Bush attempted to do exactly that, bringing up Jackson Dart, Tyler Show, and Cam Ward, quarterbacks all navigating rookie adjustments in the same era, Lloyd shut the conversation down entirely. That refusal said everything. When fair comparisons enter the room, the narrative falls apart.
But you see, they don't want to do that. They don't want to compare it to anything else. They don't want him compared to the people that are in his rookie draft class, the Jason Lloyds and the people that are exposing themselves, the Jason Lloyds, the Mary Kays. They've been not wanting anything to do with Shedeur Sanders. Let's keep it real. Let's keep it all the way real.
Those comparisons would have exposed just how selective the argument really was, and Garrett Bush made that clear. He pointed out the double standard in real time. Jackson Dart once threw for just 32 yards in a game, yet no one rushed to label him the worst quarterback in modern history. No one questioned his football intelligence or his ability to read defenses. Cam Ward, who is widely praised as a top prospect, has posted largely average numbers all season, but his performances are framed generously because the narrative around him is positive. That contrast made the bias impossible to ignore. Shedeur Sanders doesn't get that same margin for error. Every incomplete pass is magnified. Every sack is blamed on him. Even when the offensive line collapses almost immediately, every interception becomes a final verdict instead of a learning moment. When receivers drift on routes or fail to compete at the catch point, the criticism still circles back to Shedeur. The double standard is obvious, and Bush put it on full display. Bush then shifted the conversation with a question that cut straight through the noise. He asked Jason Lloyd who he was more impressed by: Dante Moore's college tape from 1 season at Oregon, or what Shedeur Sanders has already shown in 5 NFL games. That question matters because Moore is one of the quarterbacks the Browns have reportedly been monitoring for the 2026 draft. Moore plays at Oregon in the same offensive system Dillon Gabriel ran before him. When both were on the roster, Moore couldn't beat Gabriel out for the starting job. That context matters. Yet Lloyd and others are pushing Cleveland to move past Shedeur Sanders, a quarterback already taking NFL snaps, already throwing for 360 yards in a game, already leading his team in rushing, and already showing command at the line of scrimmage. Instead, the focus shifts to a college quarterback who couldn't win a starting job over someone who later struggled in Cleveland. That line of thinking doesn't hold up under even light scrutiny. It isn't grounded in tape, production, or fair comparison. It starts with the assumption that Shedeur Sanders is not the answer, then works backward to justify that belief. Bush labeled it clearly. That approach isn't scouting. It isn't analysis. It's agenda-driven commentary dressed up to look analytical. The situation looked even worse when Lloyd fell back on unnamed people in the the building. No sources, no specifics, just vague claims meant to sound informed while avoiding accountability. Meanwhile, the film is available to everyone. Viewers have watched Shedeur Sanders at the line of scrimmage calling out pressure, adjusting protections, and directing his running back. They've seen him throw accurately into tight windows, extend plays with his legs, and operate Kevin Stefanski's structured offense the way it's designed to function, including against Buffalo. What's happening on the field doesn't match the narrative being sold, and that gap keeps getting harder to explain. Receivers drop passes, protections break down. Viewers see the context Jason Lloyd chose to ignore. People aren't buying the story anymore. Once you actually watch the games, the disconnect becomes obvious, and that disconnect is exactly what Garrett Bush forced into the open. Since that segment aired, the reaction toward Lloyd has been relentless. Social media hasn't let up. Fans and analysts are questioning his credibility, calling out his motives, and demanding accountability. Many are asking him to name his sources or stop hiding behind vague claims. Others are pulling up past takes where he missed badly, stacking example after example to show this isn't a one-time issue. When someone goes on television and claims a player is the worst at their position in modern history, that isn't a small statement. That level of accusation demands airtight proof. It requires transparency. It requires real data, clearly explained with full context. Not a single metric tossed out without explanation and backed by anonymous voices. Jason Lloyd didn't bring that. He offered no breakdown, no methodology, and no real comparative framework. Garrett Bush exposed that gap in real time, and now the conversation shifts to what comes next. Does Lloyd walk it back? Does he acknowledge the flaws in his argument? Does he release the EPA data with full context and explain how it should actually be interpreted? Or does he double down, move the standard again, and reach for another stat to keep the same conclusion alive? History suggests the latter. That's how agenda-driven coverage works. Facts become optional, and the narrative always comes first. But the damage is already done. Lloyd's credibility took a visible hit, and viewers now recognize the pattern. Selective stats, ignored context, and unnamed sources doing all the heavy lifting. That kind of exposure doesn't fade easily. Shedeur Sanders doesn't need to respond to any of it. The tape speaks, the production speaks. And now, people like Garrett Bush are pushing back with actual evidence, forcing the conversation back to reality where it belongs.
G. Bush, that's how you stir the pot on him. That is exactly how you stir the spot and cook a clown like Jason Lloyd. This dude is exposed. This dude is just nothing more than a Shedeur hater. He's a part of the anybody but Shedeur train. That is what Jason Lloyd is. And he got cooked by a coworker. You got destroyed. I don't even know how you gonna sit next to him on the next panel.
He has game film that clearly shows what he's doing at the line of scrimmage. He has production that stacks up favorably against the alternatives being casually floated, and he has a level of consistency that can't be erased by one misleading television segment. What this moment really exposed is a much bigger problem with modern sports media. Too many analysts hide behind advanced metrics they never fully explain. Too many lean on unnamed sources as a shield from accountability. Instead of testing their ideas against reality, they shift standards, cherry-pick data, and ignore anything that challenges their predetermined stance. What happened on that show was a textbook example of what occurs when facts collide with a forced narrative. One side came prepared with context, logic, and fair comparisons. The other arrived with a conclusion already decided and tried to backfill the reasoning. The larger question now is whether actual decision-makers listen to this kind of commentary or trust their own evaluations. The tape exists, the performances exist, and the contrast between real analysis and agenda-driven commentary has never been clearer. This was never about winning an argument on television. It was about exposing how easily a narrative collapses once someone finally demands receipts and refuses to let the goalposts keep moving. This situation pulled the curtain back on something much bigger than one bad take. It exposed how modern sports media often works when narratives matter more than truth. A loud claim gets pushed, context gets buried, anonymous sources get used as cover, and if no one pushes back, it slowly becomes accepted reality. That's why moments like this matter. When someone slows the conversation down, asks basic questions, and demands evidence, the entire structure falls apart. That's exactly what happened here. One side showed up with conclusions already locked in. The other showed up with film, logic, and real comparisons. The difference was obvious. Shedeur Sanders never had to say a word. The tape spoke. The production spoke, and the inconsistencies in the criticism spoke even louder. Once the questioning began, the narrative couldn't survive under its own weight. This is also why platforms like Huddle Files exist.